Welcome to This Week in History. I'm Tyler Boeh, and here's all your not-so-current events. November 16th. In 1581, Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible got into an argument with his son. He cracked him in the head with a scepter, and 3 days later his son died, which is just terrible, actually. In 1871, the National Rifle Association of America was chartered in New York by William Church and George Wingate. The founders were then quoted as saying, "You can have our charter when you pry it from our cold dead hands." In 1907, Oklahoma became the 46th state in the Union. Now, coincidentally, if you rank the states by quality of life, that's right about where Oklahoma sits today. 46th. So if you live in the Panhandle state, there's a pretty good chance that you're actually panhandling. The state motto is "Oklahoma is okay," and even that might be an overstatement. In 1915, Coca-Cola introduced the prototype for its classic curvy contoured Coke bottle. But at the time, the cola still contained actual cocaine, so I'm surprised the bottle wasn't much thinner. In 1938, LSD was first synthesized by Swiss chemist Dr. Albert Hofmann at Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. Several of the doctor's assistants thought that they had successfully synthesized the drug, but to be fair, they were all dangerously high. In 1993, Russian President Boris Yeltsin shut down the Lenin Museum. After the museum was closed, it was broken into smaller parts and distributed equally amongst the people. November 17th. In 1749, Nicolas Appert was born. He was a French confectioner who invented a method of airtight food preservation and is known as the father of canning. He died in 1841, and his remains were sealed in a mason jar. On this day in history, 17 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln began working on the first draft of his Gettysburg Address. The final version would become one of the most iconic speeches in American history and would be delivered just 2 days later on November 19th. I guess Lincoln worked well under pressure, although I imagine it's a little easier to do that when you're brilliant. Most of our modern presidents have employed teams of dedicated speechwriters, and it's believed that Woodrow Wilson was probably the last president to write most, if not all, of his own speeches. So it's pretty impressive to think that Lincoln penned this masterpiece on his own in just a couple of days, all while running a country that was in the middle of a war. As exemplary as Lincoln's address is, it's incredibly concise at just 272 words. I mean, that's like 8 good tweets. In contrast, our current president can barely speak in complete, incoherent sentences, and somehow his writing is even worse. November 18th. In 1901, George Gallup was born. He was a pioneer in the field of survey sampling, and he founded the American Institute of Public Opinion. When asked recently, 2/3 of people thought a Gallup was just something horses did, 12 out of 10 people don't understand how fractions work, and after the last few election cycles, 100% of people don't trust polls. In 1939, Canadian author Margaret Atwood was born. In 1985, she published her most popular work, The Handmaid's Tale, which is a dystopian story of subjugated women in a patriarchal, totalitarian state that has overthrown the U.S. government. And I'm sure Atwood is thrilled that she survived long enough to be living through what appears to be the prequel. In 1883, thanks to the growing railroad industry, the U.S. and Canada agreed to adopt standard time zones. Prior to that, Canada was on some kind of weird metric time, and it had to be translated from French. There was an exchange rate. It was all very confusing. In 1903, the United States and Panama signed a treaty granting the U.S. rights to build the Panama Canal. The agreement was celebrated by Americans, Panamanians, and palindromists around the world. November 19th. In 1933, television and radio host Larry King was born, marking just the first of many times in his life that he'd be legally separated from a woman. Since then, he's been married 8 times to 7 different women. The man is 87 years old, and he wed his first wife at age 19, which means he's averaging a marriage like every 8 years. His 5th wife was a math teacher, which is hard to imagine. You think if she knew anything about probability and statistics, she would have steered clear of that relationship. In 1953, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that baseball is a sport and not a business, therefore making it exempt from antitrust laws and standard interstate commerce regulations. The 2 judges that ruled in opposition, they didn't even say it was a business. One said it was a pastime, and the other one said it was a game. In 1962, actor Jodie Foster was born. She's won 2 Oscars for Best Actress, a Screen Actors Guild Award for Best Performance, and she's also been recognized for her supporting role in the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. November 20th. In 1818, Simon Bolivar declared Venezuela independent from Spain. So the reign of Spain fell mainly from Bolivar's campaign. In 1914, the U.S. State Department began requiring photographs for passports because, yeah, this made the documents much more secure, harder to duplicate, and far superior to the previous system of official identification, which was apparently the honor system. In 1967, the U.S. Census population clock ticked past 200 million, thanks to your grandparents. In 1969, the Nixon administration announced a ban on the residential use of the pesticide DDT as a plan to completely phase out the use of the chemical compound. Now, despite the government's efforts, the dangerous and reckless use of the DDT is still all too common today. November 21st. In 1834, investor and financier Hetty Green was born. She was heir to a whaling fortune. Honestly, there used to be a lot of money in the blubber business. At a very early age, she showed a lot of interest in her father's business, and she was incredibly astute. She was also a lifelong advocate for women being in control of their own finances. When she was married at age 33, her husband brought a net worth of about $2 million to the relationship, but she made him sign a prenup because she didn't want to be mingling their finances, which ended up being a very smart move on her part because eventually they would separate and he would wind up in debt. Through her investments in real estate and the stock market, she amassed an incredible fortune, and with an estimated net worth of about $150 million, which was a lot of money back then, she was arguably the richest woman in the world at the time. In 1907, after a market crash, the city of New York came to her for a loan when not even the banks could bail them out, and she cut the city a check for $1.1 million. Now, you might think the people of New York would be grateful, but instead they dubbed her the Witch of Wall Street, which is fantastic, really. That has all the hallmarks of a solid insult for a lady. Of course, it reminds everybody that she's a woman. It implies that she's inherently evil, and it also insinuates that there's some kind of magic or trickery involved because it would be impossible for a woman to just simply be that brilliant at money management. Well done, New York. In 1929, surrealist artist Salvador Dali held his first art exhibit. It was very difficult to display his work because it kind of just kept sliding off the walls. November 22nd. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested within hours and then shot and killed just 2 days later when he was being escorted from a Dallas jail. The Kennedy assassination sparked numerous conspiracy theories, which implicated the mafia, the Soviets, the CIA, and even his own vice president, Lyndon Johnson. But the most commonly held belief is that there was a second shooter, which is why I think if you ask anyone that was alive during that time, they can always tell you exactly where they were and what they were doing when the president was shot. I don't really think it's that the event was such a monumental thing in their own life. It's just very important that you know that they've got an alibi. That's it for this week in history. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like, leave me a comment, or subscribe so you don't miss the next video, or the one after that, or the one after that.